what is testosterone optimization therapy? This is optimizing testosterone levels rather than simply just replacing them. The provider will need to intrinsically understand how testosterone works and how the human body works. So when you follow this process of optimizing testosterone gradually, it allows the patient to acclimatize. Okay, everyone, I hope you're all well. Welcome back to another one of my solo suits here at Victory Mental Health. I was discussing a topic recently with actually a couple of clients over the last few days, and I thought it would make a great conversation piece because this is one of the areas that I am so happy to be working with Victory Men's Health on, because they are one of the very few clinics. I can actually probably count the number of clinics that understand this, maybe even only on one hand, actually. I own two of them. And that topic is testosterone optimization therapy. Now, I wish I could say I coined this term. I didn't. A good friend of mine, Jay Campbell, I believe, coined the term in his TRT Bible, which to date is still one of the best books ever written on testosterone therapy. And what I'd like to talk about today is this distinction between testosterone replacement therapy and testosterone optimization therapy. Now, this is not going to be some semantic nonsense about definitions like distinguishing between sex and gender. This is going to be an actual conversation about real things, but I am going to get a little bit bogged down on the terms because I really think that when we're looking at testosterone optimization in men, this is what pretty much everyone who is receiving testosterone replacement therapy is looking for. And I would also argue that by default, testosterone replacement therapy kind of should be testosterone optimization therapy anyway, because it's just as much work to do a shitty TRT protocol as it is to do an optimal TRT protocol. Still got to stab yourself, or you're still going to rub cream on your nuts twice a day. So if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right. It's just as much work to inject this much oil as it is to inject this much oil. Now, when optimizing treatment, it may involve a little bit more work with your provider to get your levels right, or maybe you might have to stab yourself one extra time, or maybe 2 extra times a week with a little tiny baby needle. But the juice is absolutely worth the squeeze. So to kind of circle back, if we're talking about testosterone replacement therapy, there's a lot of things that fall under this umbrella. We could put pellets in this category. We could put injections of Reandron or libido, which are the trade names for testosterone decanoate, every 12 to 16 weeks. We could even include things like cypionate injections, 1 mil of 200 milligram per mil testosterone injected every 2 weeks, sustanon, 1 mil injected every 3 weeks. All of these things would fall under the umbrella of testosterone replacement therapy, technically. The problem is that all of these treatment options, garbage. And depending on your baseline state of hypogonadism, you might even be better off being hypogonadal than being on one of these treatment protocols. And the problem with these treatments is, yes, you are replacing testosterone levels in the body. You are taking your endogenous testosterone, which is the testosterone that your testicles make, and you are replacing it with exogenous testosterone, meaning from outside the body. So all of these things are technically testosterone replacement therapy, but all of these things suck. And unfortunately, one of the most disturbing things that I came across in America, aside from the rampant homelessness, was the fact that 99.9% of people practicing testosterone replacement therapy, in the words of your president, don't know what the fuck they're doing. And I didn't realize it was this bad. I really did not realize how bad the state of the industry was. Maybe it's because I'm in my echo chamber of people who actually know what they're doing, but I didn't realize how small of a minority these smart people are. Because there really is only a handful of people who actually get this. And it's a shame because I don't know if we're in the hundreds of thousands or millions of TRT patients, but it's a big number. And I would say 99.9% of them are having suboptimal to terrible treatment protocols, and as a result, suboptimal to terrible treatment outcomes. So what is testosterone optimization therapy? This is, without using part of the title to define the word, because I know you're not meant to do that, but this is optimizing testosterone levels rather than simply just replacing them. And there's a skill barrier to this. The provider will need to intrinsically understand how testosterone works and how the human body works, which I don't know. I thought that would be a prerequisite for practicing this form of medicine, but you learn something new every day. But the benefit of this form of therapy is that it delivers life-changing results. And the problem is, most people are expecting those life-changing results, and they're not getting them because their provider doesn't know what they're doing and their protocol sucks. Also, a lot of the time, the patient isn't actually healthy. That's a problem too, but I've discussed that enough here. So we're going to specifically have a conversation assuming that the patient is actually taking care of themselves like a smart, mature, healthy adult, which is a big assumption, but we are going to run with that assumption. So when we're looking at testosterone optimization therapy, I have a bit of a process that I go through with this. I've written a book on this. It's called TRT 101. I've completely listed it out for everyone in an instruction manual format, but I'm going to go through some of those nuances here today because I think they are very important to discuss. So when starting a TRT protocol, we have to start somewhere. We don't know if the patient is going to be a hypo or hyper responder, meaning low or high. We don't know exactly how they're going to react to testosterone replacement therapy, but typically there are a few variables that will go into play with a starting protocol. The first variable is, well, what form of administration are we going to use? Because while there are a bunch, other than two, they're crap. And it's testosterone, cypionate, or enanthate, which are basically Coke and Pepsi. They are so similar. They are long-acting esters. Or we're looking at a topical transscrotal testosterone cream. This is typically compounded at anywhere from 10 to 20%. There are various bases available. I prefer a 20% cream unless someone is extremely sensitive to it. It's not a huge real estate area, especially once the testicles have shrunk down a bit. Maybe some people have big swinging nutsacks and they have a whole bunch of real estate there, but the less cream that you can put on to get the same amount of testosterone, the better. This is why Testogel sucks. Testogel doesn't make any sense when you can compound a cream that's 10 times stronger. Doesn't make any sense to put 10 times the amount of goo all over your body to get the same amount of testosterone as you could with a quarter of the amount of toothpaste you'd put on a toothbrush. Doesn't make any logical sense. I would love to debate anyone who would argue the contrary, though. I think that would be a fantastic way to spend some time. So that form of administration is important to discuss. I'm primarily going to talk about injections here today, but the same concepts can be applied to cream. But if I talk about both in terms of titration, we're going to be here all day. But I will do another podcast episode, I promise, on adjusting and titrating cream, because it's something that a lot of people don't speak about, and I have a huge amount of exhaustive experience going through this process with hundreds and thousands of men. So if we're going to start with injections, there's an important point to look at, which is that you have to do a protocol that divides into the amount of injection administrations based on what you can measure on an insulin syringe. You can't give a patient 167 milligrams of testosterone injected every other day and expect them to draw that out on an insulin syringe. It's not possible. I mean, it's maybe possible if you've got a magnifying glass, but it's not possible. So what we have to do firstly, and I'm going to cater this conversation for America because I assume most of the audience will be in America. In Australia and Europe and the UK, we typically use 250 milligram per mil testosterone. In the US, I don't know if you guys haven't worked out how to get that much testosterone into the oil yet, or maybe old habits die hard, but typically the product that you're using will be a 200 milligram per mil testosterone cypionate. So when we're using an insulin syringe, which is the only syringe that anyone should use to administer TRT unless you are a masochist, in which case get yourself an 18 gauge 2-inch needle if you want to, but a 27 to 29 gauge needle is going to be your best bet. The 30 to 31 gauge needles, I mean, if you have the patience of a saint, then perhaps you could use one of those, and if you're 8% body fat, you could hit the muscle with that, but for the vast majority of people, a 27 or 29 gauge is going to be perfect. A 27 gauge is a little bit more spicy. 29 gauge will take a little bit longer to draw and inject, but it's a bit more comfortable. I recommend getting a box of both, trying both, and see which one you prefer. I prefer the 29s. Maybe I'm a pansy. Maybe I've been doing this for almost 10 years, but I prefer the 29s. So when you're drawing your injection, you're going to be looking at the needle going 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, unless you get a small needle, which are only up to 50, but most people are using 1 mil insulin syringes. These markings on the side are for units of insulin, which we are not injecting. So each of these increments of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on represents 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and so on of a mil. So I didn't do the best in mathematics in school, but I believe, last I checked, a tenth of 200 is 20. So that means the 10 mark on the insulin syringe is going to be 20 milligrams of testosterone. And each of those little lines in between, which is 0.02, 0.04, blah, 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 all the way up to 10, is going to represent 4 milligrams of testosterone. So each of those tiny little dashes you're looking at on your needle represents 4 milligrams of testosterone, and every big number, which is 10, 20, 30, up to 100, is going to represent 20 milligrams of testosterone. So this means that per injection, the testosterone has to be in increments or intervals, depending on which one of those words is the mathematically correct term, of 4. If it is of 3, if you're trying to inject 23 milligrams of testosterone or 21 milligrams of testosterone, it's not going to work. So this is very important when prescribing doses to patients, is that we also have to tell them this is what the dose looks like on a syringe, because they're going to get home and go, oh, I'm meant to inject 40 milligrams of testosterone 3 times a week, and I've got this vial and I've got this needle and I'm a complete fish out of water. I've never used injections before. I've never done this before. It doesn't mean the patient's an idiot. It means that they're in unfamiliar territory. So I always recommend prescribing to the patient not just the milligrams of testosterone either per injection or per week, but what that looks like on the insulin syringe. Very, very helpful. Saves patients making errors, which ultimately is going to be the provider's problem at the end of the day. So save yourself the headache, do a bit of extra work, calculate out the dose. You will thank me for it later. Now, when we are starting someone on a testosterone optimization protocol, there's a couple of factors which come into starting the foundational dose outside of mathematics. One is the patient's SHBG level. Now, the lower the SHBG, the more free testosterone they're going to have from X milligram of testosterone. The higher the SHBG, the less free testosterone is going to spill over. Now, when we start a testosterone therapy protocol using exogenous testosterone, the SHBG will come down. How far will it come down? Depends on the patient's genetics, depends on the health of their liver, depends on the health of their thyroid, depends on their diet and lifestyle factors, depends on a bunch of stuff. But it will come down a little bit. So if a patient has got an SHBG of, let's say, 80 when starting treatment, if you give them the testosterone dose that takes them to the top of the reference range, they may still be hypogonadal. In fact, they may already have total testosterone levels at the top of the reference range and still be hypogonadal because it's all bound up to the SHBG. So if you start them on 120 or 140 milligrams of testosterone a week, you might just basically replacing hypogonadism from the testicles with hypogonadism from a needle. So the starting dose of testosterone must be factored in. Conversely, if someone has an SHBG of 7, which is a problem usually, typically will represent hypothyroidism or prediabetes or even full-blown diabetes. If you start them on, let's say, 200 milligrams of testosterone a week, you're going to blow them straight through the stratosphere. Now, they may feel like King Kong, they may feel like Superman, or they may feel like an overstimulated, sweaty, pimply mess. So SHBG needs to be taken into consideration. The other thing that needs to be taken into consideration is the patient's age and the patient's health.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
If you're a geriatric 90-year-old, jacking your free testosterone straight to double the top of the reference range may not be the best idea. Conversely, if someone is a healthy 21-year-old athlete, taking them up to the top quartile of the reference range may not do a whole bunch of much. Might be like drinking a light beer and trying to get a buzz. It's not going to do much. It's going to move the needle in the right direction, but only a little bit. So I typically like to start people, and then now, if we're assuming that someone's healthy, we're assuming that someone's got a relatively average SHBG, and we're assuming they're about the average age of someone starting testosterone replacement therapy, which, let's say for all intents and purposes, is about 40 years old. I like to start people in Australia on about 140 to 150 milligrams a week. But if I was using a 200 milligram per mil solution, anywhere from 120 milligrams and up is a great place to start. Anything less than that is not going to do much. Anything more than about 160 to 170 milligrams per week can be a little bit too much too soon for most people. Now, some providers like to start people off higher than that. Great. No problem. If it works for them, great. But this is how I do it. There's multiple ways to skin a cat. I love using that saying. It's very macabre. So I also like people to inject as often as they will. And when I say that, there's a lot of ways to apply that. So if someone, for example, we have a lot of guys who do fly in, fly out work in Australia. So they're working on the mines, they're working on oil rigs. If you have people who are nurses, police, paramedics doing shift work, daily injections can be a real hassle. It can be a real burden, and it can just be something that compliance is not going to be there. And compliance is a science. If compliance isn't there, it's not going to work. And we all know that everything that rhymes is true. So if compliance is not there, it doesn't matter how optimal the protocol is. It's not going to work because it's not going to happen. So anywhere from 2 injections a week at the absolute minimum up to daily injections is where we should be starting. And I like to start at 3 injections a week. For me, this is the Goldilocks zone of going, hey, you've never used a needle before, you've never done this before. This is probably going to be overwhelming and seem like a whole bunch of work. But 3 tiny little injections a week into the shoulder. If a diabetic child can do it multiple times a day, you can do it 3 times a week as a full-grown man. If you can't, we've got other issues. So 3 times a week is a great place to start to optimize testosterone therapy. That would be 0.2 of a mil 3 times a week. Now, some guys might do a little bit better with 0.3 3 times a week, or anywhere in between that is good based on the individual's dosing requirements and all the individual factors that go into starting someone on a optimal therapeutic dose. And the analogy I like to use here is that if we hit the bullseye on the dartboard, great. But what we're really aiming for is just to hit the ring around it. And then what we do through follow-up blood work, as well as conversations, is gradually move that dart into the center of the dart. And this process is called titration. And the titration process is very important. And for some reason, again, providers don't seem to understand this, except for places like Victory Men's Health, my clinics, and a handful of other allied providers, which are all featured in the Silverback Summit network. If people want to check out my friend Ellie Gilbert's fantastic project, where she puts on an awesome event every year. Unfortunately, you will have to see me there, but there are some other fantastic people that you can also rub shoulders with. Now, when we're titrating a TRT protocol, there are different ways to do this, but there's my way of doing it, and I think my way is the best. And the way that I like to do it is I like to adjust testosterone replacement therapy or testosterone optimization therapy protocols by the least amount I can at a time and repeat that process as often as I can. I can't really think of a good argument against this, but I'd love to hear one. So for example, let's say someone starts on 0.2 mil 3 times a week, 120 milligrams of testosterone, split into 3 shots. So 0.2 Monday, 0.2 Wednesday, and 0.2 again on Friday. 12 weeks in, blood work, they feel a bit better, great. Levels are, let's say, somewhere within the top quartile of the reference range to a quartile above the top of the reference range, which this is typically where people will fall on this protocol if they respond on average. And we're not going to talk about outliers because outliers don't disprove rules. Some people don't seem to understand that. So if we're going to titrate the protocol up from here, the way that I would do that is increase it to 0.22 mil 3 times a week. This equates in 200 milligram per mil testosterone to 4 milligrams per injection. So now we're injecting 24 milligrams 3 times a week. And if my mental math is correct, that moves us up to 132 milligrams of testosterone per week. Now, I wish everyone worked in increments of 5 because that number just seems like a nice round number, but it is what it is. I also wish we could all use the same units of measurement. We could all measure things in centimeters and kilometers, but it is what it is. So 132 milligrams of testosterone per week. And people will turn around and go, well, 12 milligrams of testosterone per week isn't going to make much of a difference. It's a step on the way to the final destination. Now, let's use another example of, let's say, someone who maybe doesn't know what they're doing. Patient comes in and they go, oh, I want to put my dose up. Provider goes, okay, well, I'll do whatever the patient says because I don't know what I'm doing. And they'll increase the dose to, let's say, 0.3 mil 3 times a week. So in this situation, we've gone from 20 milligrams of testosterone, 40 milligrams of testosterone per injection, so 40, 80, 120 milligrams per week. And we've increased that now to 60 milligrams of testosterone 3 times a week. We've gone from 120 milligrams per week to 180 milligrams per week. Now, for all we know, this is the end destination that I was gradually working towards by increasing from 0.2 per shot to 0.22 per shot to 0.24 per shot to 0.26 per shot. And you get the point every 12 to 16 weeks, which is the way I like to do it. Step up, step up, step up, step up, step up. But if we just shoot there straight away and we increase the dose by 60 milligrams per week, keep in mind the patient's been on treatment for all of 3 to maybe 4 months at this stage. This actually may be where they need to be. But if you get there too quickly, this can often cause the side effects. This can cause the problem. We go from 0 to 100 way too quick, and the body is not capable of tolerating this dose because it's still adjusting to the fact that we've already doubled or tripled the testosterone dose in a short space of time. A lot of the time, the patient is going to be assessing their subjective response to treatment based on their libido, their energy, their morning erections, and how they feel in the gym. The body is much more complex than that, and there are a slew of enzymatic and regulatory processes that testosterone impacts. It impacts literally every single system in the body. So the problem is they get to 180 too quick and they go, oh, I had side effects, so I'm going to reduce the dose to, let's say, 160 milligrams per week now. Find that middle point. That might not be the end of the world, but they actually may have benefited from the higher dose in terms of optimizing their subjective state of health and their objective outcomes to prevent the 4 diseases of aging. But they got there too quick and they had a bad experience and the provider didn't understand what was going on. The big point to note here for the younger people listening, and when I say younger, I mean anyone around my age or less, because my definition of younger is however old I am. So if you're under the age of 30 or you're under the age of 35 and you have hypogonadism, we are not correcting your testosterone levels back to where they were when you were 21, because back when they were 21, they were still crap. When we take a guy who's 50, who's hypogonadal, we go, oh, let's get you feeling how you felt back when you were in your early 20s. And he goes, oh, hell yeah. You take a guy who's 30 and you go, let's take you back to feeling like how you felt when you were 20. And he goes, I felt crap when I was 20. Because the younger guys are having a different situation than older guys. And this point is so critically important for younger men that if you are a younger guy listening to this, you may need to listen to it twice. Younger men who have hypogonadism have never had optimal testosterone levels to begin with. We are entering uncharted biological territory. We are not restoring testosterone levels to where they were before. We are taking them to where they should have been all along, but the body has never experienced this. The body has never had this level of testosterone a day in your life, which means that there is a much longer adaptation process that must occur for all the different processes that your body has that you don't think about because they're not related to your muscles or your sex drive. But they are important and they do exist, believe it or not, they do. So I like to do things very gradually in very small steps. And I like to repeat this titration process with blood work every 12 to 16 weeks. And as we move up by the least amount we can per injection every 2 to 3 months, it means that when we do get to that optimal level, we really know where that is. And if we overshoot it, we know what we've done and we can back it right down and we can find that Goldilocks zone. Sometimes you have to cross the line to find out where that line is. Ask any toddler, they'll tell you that. So when it comes to finding that line, people go, well, what happens when I cross the line? What happens if I put my dose up by another 12 milligrams per week, 4 milligrams per shot, 0.02 mil? What happens when I cross that? And typically, the stuff that will come up is acne, excess sweating, night sweats. Those are the big ones. Broken light sleep will also come into that mess. But typically, sleep quality will go down the toilet, sweating will go through the roof, particularly sweating after eating. That's the big one. So if you notice you're starting to feel kind of overstimulated, cranked up in a bad way, kind of like you've had too many energy drinks, and you notice that you're soaking the pillow at night when you're sweating, or you're having to put the air conditioning on, or everyone around you is in, hoodies and jackets and you're wearing a singlet and you're kind of fanning yourself to stay cool, this can be an indicator that you've crossed that line. But also there are biomarkers that your practitioner will see. And my experience from doing this process a lot with a lot of men for a long time is that we will see a spike. And we'll see a spike in a bunch of stuff at the same time. And the things that spike will typically be hematocrit will spike, LDL will tank, AST and ALT will spike as well. Blood pressure will also spike. But you also have to measure blood pressure properly, like they do at Victory Men's Health, to actually get a proper blood pressure reading. If people are measuring their blood pressure at home, there are great videos which explain how to do it. Dr. Todd Lee has a fantastic video on how to do this, but you can also just Google it and learn how to do it properly. Spoiler, any measurement with a cuff in the doctor's office is probably going to be told as lab coat syndrome, or what is it called? White lab coat syndrome or whatever. It's just incompetence from the doctor because they haven't actually followed the guidelines of having the patient be at rest for a period of 10 minutes before measuring the blood pressure. So blood pressure will spike, sleep will go down the toilet, sweating will go up, hematocrit will go up, LDL will go down, AST, ALT will go up. All of these things happening in concert will give you a great indication that line has been crossed. We back it back down, and that is the sweet spot. Typically, a testosterone optimization therapy protocol will fall outside the reference range to the north end. Now, some guys are optimized within the top quartile of the reference range. Absolutely. Absolutely. Not everyone needs to be that high. Some people can't tolerate levels higher than that. I assume it's because they have much denser androgen receptors, or they have more androgen receptors, or they have more sensitive androgen receptors. People have all kinds of theories about what this is, but from a scientific standpoint, we don't exactly know why some guys need more and some guys need less, but they absolutely do. So when you follow this process of optimizing testosterone gradually, it allows the patient to acclimatize to the higher levels of testosterone as they go. It also builds in another really important process, which is giving the treatment time to work. Because the most optimized TRT protocol will still take months and years to deliver the full outcomes of treatment. It does not take 3 months to fix hypogonadism. It takes 3 years to fix hypogonadism. Puberty is not over in months. The acclimatization and outcomes of optimizing hormone replacement therapy levels also takes a similar amount of time. So this process is not rocket science, but it does require listening to patients, and it does require having an intrinsic understanding of human biology, men's behavioral psychology, and hormone replacement therapy, especially how testosterone works. Most providers in the world don't know what they're doing, and the reason why I pushed Victory Men's Health into partnering with me is that when I met them and I went out to their clinic, I could see that they were one of the few clinics that not only had fantastic patient protocols, but also had fantastic relationships with their patients. This is a clinic that is actually trained properly by people who are not just interested in replacing the levels, but optimizing the levels. And for most people that I've worked with, they're either not taking enough testosterone, they're not healthy enough to tolerate the amount of testosterone that they're taking, or they're not injecting or administering their testosterone often enough. Stability is king. And the higher the dose, the more stable it needs to be, because volatility is much more problematic when there's more of it. So you need to inject as often as you will. Daily is obviously going to be the best, but 3 times a week is fantastic for most people. Twice a week is the bare minimum you can get away with. If you are prescribed testosterone less often than twice a week, your provider needs more training and you need to find someone who actually knows what they're doing. So I hope that helped. I hope that's helped you understand a bit more about how testosterone works. And if you are not already working with Victory Men's Health and you live in the US, I strongly recommend reaching out to them, especially if you are not dialed in on your TRT protocol, because they are one of the best at what they do. If you are outside of the US and you need help with these treatments, if you're in Australia, you can contact Primal Zone and work with me directly. If you're in Europe, you can also work with TRT Baltic. I hope that helped, and I will see you guys on the next.
Stop doing all the things you know you shouldn't be doing and start doing all the things you know you should be doing. If people are looking for where to start, it's that. Testosterone is what creates confidence. It's what gives the capacity for leadership. It's what drives the ability for one to become courageous and competent in their skill set. If you go on TRT and then live a lifestyle that you would never have those levels in the first place, your blood's going to get really